Thank you for downloading this episode of the Physicians Gallery podcast. We have expanded our gallery. It's free to visit with no need to book a ticket. Over the next few months, we'll be exploring some of the fascinating objects we now have on display, from alchemical scrolls and battlefield medicine at Culloden to bloodletting and homeopathy. Please support us and help us to reach new audiences by liking, following, or leaving a comment on whatever podcast platform you are listening on. And please do pay a visit to our gallery when you're next in Edinburgh. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome to the podcast. I'm Daisy Cunynghame, the Physicians Gallery's Heritage Manager.
And I'm Rachel Forrest. I'm the Physicians Gallery's Heritage Engagement Coordinator.
And our object today is the Ripley Alchemical Scroll, Part 4. Last part.
Finally over.
We've made it. We've made it.
We understand it now.
I would not go that far. Before we go through each one of the final sections, I thought I'd start up with where alchemy ended up. So alchemy goes in three main different directions, which is science, fiction, and quackery. So there's a great quote I came across from the philosopher and scientist Francis Bacon. Alchemy may be compared to the man who told his sons he had left them gold buried somewhere in his vineyard, where they by digging found no gold, but by turning up the mould about the roots of their vines procured a plentiful vintage. So the search and endeavours to make gold have brought many useful inventions and instructive experiments to light. So basically, alchemy is you're not really going to make gold, but by doing this process, by working in a laboratory and mixing different chemicals together, you are doing science. You are doing the early days of laboratory science, is what Francis Bacon is saying there.
So that is kind of saying that alchemy inspired chemistry.
Yeah, and alchemy is very important, even though in itself you're never going to, find the secret to eternal life. But it creates a lot of the principles of experimentation and analysis, carefully measuring your ingredients, writing up your findings, data, trials, all those sorts of things which become chemistry and also become other sciences. And many of the great figures who are founders of modern scientific methods, like Isaac Newton and Robert Boyle, were themselves practicing alchemists. So it's a real crossover transition where it's literally the people who are doing science are also doing alchemy in those early days. Other thing, which is slightly more tangential, is where the words crop up. So we talked before about how the phrase hermetically sealed comes from the seal of Hermes and is part of the alchemical process. There's another example of an alchemist called Johann Glauber, and he was interested in alchemy, but he was also interested in chemistry. He was very interested in distillation. He was largely self-taught. He was a German man, and one point when he fell ill, some people told him to drink mineral water from a particular well. He discovered that the water contained sodium sulfate, and he then marketed this product, and it became known as Glauber's salt. So named after an alchemist, but it's still a product that you can find today. So again, something that people buy, they don't necessarily realize that what they're buying is a result of the research of an alchemist. Glauber thought that his salt at the time, that's not how we understand it now, of course, but Glauber thought that his Glauber salt was going to be the elixir of life. And so there's this huge phase of going through different elixirs of life. And I do think this is a huge legacy of alchemy. The idea that there is a single medicine which can be used to treat almost everything. And I think in medicine, long after alchemy is forgotten about, this idea of a single medicine hangs on. And so it goes through so many phases. At one point, it's unicorn horn. Later on, it's quinine or electricity or radium. I would argue potentially antibiotics in the late 20th century. This idea that instead of what most of us would usually think, which is it's a different medicine for different diseases, alchemy really embedded this idea of one medicine, one elixir that does everything. And a lot of the story of the history of medicine is searching for that elusive one thing. And it just jumps from tobacco to radium to electricity, and they try everything and they've never found it.
Yeah, and there's so many plants and herbals where they're listing all the things that it could cure. And they're saying things that contradict each other, like it could help diarrhea, but it could also help constipation. And I'm not sure you can use one thing to treat those two very different illnesses.
Very different, arguably even opposing. I am also obviously not a medical doctor, but it doesn't sound logical to me.
Just doesn't make sense.
So that's the science element. The fiction element is pretty self-explanatory, and probably most people, as we've been repeatedly saying throughout these episodes, the phrase "Philosopher's Stone" have probably been thinking, that sounds rather familiar. That's one of the elements of alchemy, is that it then leads into fiction. It then gets used in Harry Potter novels, is the most obvious example, but alchemy crops up elsewhere as well. But it's a tool that is used in fiction because it is so exotic and weird and confusing, and so it's a very useful fiction tool.
People are probably imagining it as the Harry Potter version, where it almost looks like a ruby. It's red and it's shiny, but nowhere does this scroll describe it as that, does it?
No, we don't know what the Philosopher's Stone looks like. It's not always clear that the Philosopher's Stone is definitely a physical thing, which is really unhelpful. Um,
So it could be a pebble, or it could be a cup. It could be something that is not a stone at all.
Absolutely. And the other place that alchemy ends up is really nowhere at all. So, as legitimate scientists, legitimate qualified physicians move away from alchemy and start using chemistry and laboratory techniques in more scientific ways, then the only people left who are talking about alchemy are the quacks. So, into the 1700s, you are still getting references to alchemical processes. These quacks who are door-to-door salesmen on a grand scale, who are conning people out of money, and it's really only the most dubious of the quacks who are left in the camp of alchemy.
It's interesting to see how the con has changed. They no longer have one wealthy patron who funds everything. They're now going door to door, trying to con multiple people for smaller amounts. If it had continued, it would have gone from patron to door to multi-level marketing. We'd have alchemy multi-level marketing now.
Absolutely. I mean, there's plenty of other types of mysticism that have ended up in that world, the horoscopes and so on. So we're nearly there. We've just got a couple of bits of the scroll to work through. So section 7, the penultimate section. So the blood, which we've talked about before, which has flowed down the scroll, it came from feathers. It turned into blood. It came from a toad and a bird and the mouths of lions. All that blood that's flowed down the whole document ends up here with a winged dragon. Now, this winged dragon is bleeding. And what you think is happening depends on who you listen to, because it could be bleeding from its stomach, but it looks to me like it's menstruating.
Oh, so the dragon's on their period.
It's what it looks like. It strongly looks like that. And I think it's more likely to be that because George Ripley, who is the person who is supposed to have not written this document, but come up with the theory or the story that the document, the scroll tells, has talked before about menstruation. So in a poem he wrote called The Compound of Alchemy, he talked about the importance of, quote, the blood called our secret menstrual blood. And he described how that was central to alchemy. So I think, let's see, it could be the dragon could be bleeding from its stomach, but my theory is it is menstruating, and there is talk elsewhere about menstrual blood being part of alchemy. All the feathers, all the blood going from every section just goes down and down and down the scroll and ends up with a menstruating dragon. So, the next section, which is the final section. And you can see that this is wrapping up. So if you remember at the start, there was this sort of great big image of Hermes, who was associated with the creation or the discovery of alchemy. So he started it, and now here we have him again ending it. So this is very much the footnote, the conclusion of the whole story. The final section, there are two figures grasping either side of a column of poetry. On the left is someone who is probably George Ripley. It's clearly someone who is a scholar and a cleric, and so is almost certainly George Ripley. And on the right is a man in robes with a crown, and that is almost certainly Hermes.
Hermes again.
Hermes started it, Hermes ended it.
And there was possibly Hermes as a monk in the middle?
Yes. And the poem that they hold between them is essentially a bibliography. So, unlike the other poems that are dotted throughout the scroll, I haven't read all those poems out. They're very, very confusing and very long, but they are often quite abstract, difficult to understand. This is much clearer. This is a bibliography. This cites all the important sources for alchemical knowledge. And it's essentially saying this is where you go. So it cites the Greek philosopher Aristotle. It cites Hermes. There's a woman who is the female version of Hermes. She's a mythical female alchemist called Maria Prophetessa.
I wonder if she could be the woman in the bath.
I was wondering that just as I was saying it, but I don't know. The woman in the bath is nude. I'm not sure if you would show Maria as nude because she is, an alchemist and an established figure. I don't know. It talks about the Holy Trinity and the importance of the Holy Trinity and God. So it's not trying to be cryptic. It's not trying to give you part of the recipe. It's just sort of citing its sources. And the last piece of text at the end says, quote, "If you seek the secrets of philosophy in dung, you will lose the expense, the effort, as well as time and labor."
Does that mean that you're not supposed to rummage in poo?
I don't think it's necessarily literal.
Okay.
I don't know for sure, but I would guess something like you have to use the correct ingredients and do all of this correctly. You cannot cut corners with alchemy.
So don't use poopy ingredients.
I mean, that is my guess.
Okay.
But it's basically saying there's a lot of time and a lot of effort goes into this, but it's such a precise process. Don't think that you can do this without the feather of a phoenix from China and all that sort of stuff. So, summary of this section: menstruating dragon, 2 wise men with a poem, bit about dung. Thank you for listening to this Physicians Gallery podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, click like, or leave a positive review or comment. We truly appreciate your support because it helps us reach more people. If you'd like to know more about the Physicians Gallery, our exhibitions and upcoming events, please check out our website and social media pages. Links are in the description for this episode. Thank you.